In about a month, Taiwan is going to elect its next president. Now, how will that choice affect Taiwan's relations with China and national security? Well, today I speak with a top defense expert, Professor Alexander Huang of Danjiang University. He's also the chairman of the Council on Strategic and Wargaming Studies. Well, Professor Huang, we learned in the news this week that Taiwan is doubling its strength in protecting the president at this time. Why at this time do you think that there is a danger of attack from China?
Well, I think it's a general acknowledgement that in modern warfare, especially after the Persian Gulf War in 1991, all modern military assault or that can lead to decisive decision of who is the winner, who is the loser, usually it takes about only 3 weeks. We no longer see the World War I and World War II like several years of massive mobilization and massive casualties. Right now, it's always over the horizon, long-range precision attack. So the modern nature of warfare had determined that country or adversaries can use a long-range assault to decapitate the command center, which includes the president and all key national security advisors. People believe that if you wipe out the head and the body, no matter how strong the body would be, the outcome has been decided. So how to deal with a possible future Chinese long-range assault against our command and control center to protect the security of the president and make sure that the government continuity can survive a military conflict has become a key issue for all the defense planners and all makers of national security policy.
Okay, that's because of our presidential election, right?
Not necessarily for the election, but for a confronting adversaries. You gotta have always keep in mind that these are possibilities.
So how likely do you think an attack from China would be, a military attack?
I think, to be honest, the viable option, military option, and keep the negative side effect away would probably the decapitation. Because China, once China decided to use force against Taiwan, they cannot wait until the international intervention. And we all know that the United States, no matter how many forces are now deployed in the Indo-Pacific region, it takes time to come to Taiwan's rescue. So there are people arguing that if China can kill Taiwan in one shot, which means that make a decisive outcome appear within 72 hours, then they can prevent foreign intervention at all because the international community would not be able to react. Taking the example of Crimea, of Ukraine, the Russian troops got in and took over almost within 2 days. And even before NATO or European Union convene any meeting to react to the situation, a fait accompli is already there in Crimea. So there are lessons for Taiwan to learn. And so this is a specific concern of all our national security planning since even before last presidency.
So under what conditions do you think China would make that move?
I think China has a long agenda for itself. China needs to reach a benchmark called the level of moderate prosperity in all sectors, which means that China would not have any county below the poverty line. They set the goal for 2020, and by 2021, China will celebrate the centennial of the Communist Party, and 2022 will be the end of the 5-year term of the General Secretary Xi Jinping. So if he wanted to renew his position, both in party and in government, he needs a peaceful environment. Unplanned military conflict, even local or regional, would probably disrupt his plan. So in China's interest, at least in the next few years, it's better keep the peripheral relatively peaceful, including the Korean Peninsula. By saying that, I mean there's no incentives for China to wage a war against Taiwan unless, I think you wanted to know what would happen or the extreme conditions that China would do it. I think it's China had made it very clear that if Taiwan continue to walk away from China, the decolonization movement in Taiwan, or foreign involvement. A Chinese diplomat in Washington had suggested several years ago that when American warships dock at Kaohsiung port, that would be the time for military action by China. So I think only through extreme political difficulties or a breakaway in any kind of political taboo or cross the so-called red line, then China would be forced to use force against Taiwan.
I see. Well, what about, we have two major candidates vying for the election.
Yes.
So can you describe what you think will happen with our relations with China if either of these candidates are elected? Let's say President Taiwan, if she gets reelected, how do you foresee China relations developing?
I think the viewers, the audience, had already witnessed what had happened under Tsai Ing-wen in the past 3.5 years of this kind of relationship between Taiwan and China. So if she got reelected, that means we will have 8 years of the same situation.
You think it will get worse?
I guess so.
I mean, in terms of they're trying to isolate Taiwan or take away allies, or do you think that they would be open at all to communicating with the DPP?
A re-election of President Tsai may mean 8 years of no communication between government in Beijing and Taipei, no official contact, no regular institutionalized negotiations or meetings. It may mean that Taiwan lose more diplomatic ally. We have lost 7 in the past 3.5 years. If President Tsai get re-elected, we don't know how many of the remaining 15 would last. So this is a challenge that Taiwan voters need to think very hard and make their choice. If the other person, Mayor Han Kuo-yu, got elected, I would say that that China would at least take a wait-and-see approach and see whether a change of government in Taiwan would lead to a more moderate policy from Taiwan toward China. And China may test the new Taiwan government and see if more peaceful, more incentives that provided by Beijing would have a better result receiving by Taiwan public. I would say that there is a sharp difference on the position of mainland China policy. Han Kuo-yu believed that there is a vaguely agreed 92 consensus. President Tsai strongly opposed, or at least using that term. So Beijing would definitely react differently. So we'll see what happens. I think if China needs a peaceful environment in the next 4 or 5 years, if Taiwan needs a break from suffering of diplomatic ally losing, I think there will be a relatively calm period.
So people are concerned that Mayor Han is too close to China. There's that perception, and that perhaps Taiwan may compromise its sovereignty if there's something, there have been mention of a peace accord or that kind of a possibility if Mayor Han becomes president. So what do you think about that concern that people have?
It's natural that Taiwan people, in general terms, has such anxiety over any deal between Taiwan and China. I have to say that there is no reason for Han Kuo-yu to deal with China by giving up sovereignty. For what? It's not necessary. Taiwan, no matter who is the president, have maintained a very close relationship with the United States. Taiwan knows, no matter who, blue or green, that the United States is the only provider of our Taiwan's defense articles and services, major weapon systems, and we are a so-called, we have a shared value, and we like to call us the like-minded countries between Taiwan and the United States. So there's no reason. I understand that the international press, the general public wanted simple answers. Who is pro-U.S., who is pro-China? I think it is not a crime to try to manage a peaceful relationship and maintain direct communication with Beijing. Calling someone doesn't mean that you should marry someone. You just keep the business going and make sure that governments on two sides can resolve problems through negotiations. If you cut off the telephone line, if you do not respond to any phone calls, when there is other potential danger that miscalculation could happen. Even you stand strong, but without regular communication, you might invite unexpected incidents in the future.
So there's also been a lot of concern about China's interference in our election.
Right.
China has for many years tried to interfere through
Right.
throwing missiles and other different ways. What about this time? What do you see happening in this election as to China's trying to influence the election?
China's influence campaign over Taiwan's politics or Taiwan elections, or for more conventional wisdom, is like lobbing missiles to the waters near Taiwan, threatening Taiwan people by official statement, or funnel money to support a certain candidate to make sure that they have more campaign funding. These are all in the past. We don't know whether it will appear again this time. But a new phenomenon is that the cyber world kick in this time, and kick in strongly. So there are different cases that people wanted to allege that China had intervened Taiwan's politics or campaign process by providing fake news or feeding untrue information to certain website, or try to monitor Taiwan's cyber communications and see if they can intervene. But I would say from the outset that if China is using cyber channels or platforms to intervene in Taiwan's political process, it would be against Taiwan, not against any particular campaign or person. Because China's purpose is very clear, is to make sure that Taiwan's democracy fail or Taiwan cannot perform well in the democratic process. So I don't think that it is especially we need to understand that Xi Jinping, ever since he came into power, he had shifted its policy toward Taiwan. Since Deng Xiaoping, China tried to work with KMT before, and later on they said we could only lay hope to the Taiwan Authority because Taiwan had became a country that having regular change of government. So from KMT to Taiwan authorities, and later on they said we lay the hope to Taiwan people. Xi Jinping changed that. Xi Jinping said the resolve of Taiwan issue is primarily depending on China's development. If China becomes stronger, the issue will be resolved. So they are less likely using influence to promote one party or one person against the other. They are now promoting themselves.
You mean strong? How would they resolve it by China being stronger? What is Xi Jinping's line of thinking here?
I think stronger are at least three. One is that they keep taking Taiwan's diplomatic allies away, further isolate and strangle Taiwan in international arena. Number two, the mainland China's economy is a huge market that would lure more Taiwan business investment. And under Xi Jinping, not only money or investment, now they have policies to lure the young talent of Taiwan to move to China and work there. And the third, of course, is the military presence. They don't need to attack Taiwan. They just show Taiwan that their second carrier is already passing sea trial, and the third one is under construction, and try to use their most powerful psychological weapon to make Taiwan feel that it is almost impossible to fight against the Chinese might, not in diplomacy, not in economics, not militarily. So the psychological operations is the key to crush Taiwan's will to defend itself. And this is common for the entire Taiwan. It's not a specific ingredient for one political party.
So how effective is China in these three areas? I mean, how do you think the public stands right now in terms of?
I think it's been there already. And that's why I think college professors have the responsibility to help students and deal with this feeling. In local slang, it's called the dry mango or the defeatism. The feeling that Taiwan cannot win eventually is now somewhat rooted in the young generation's minds and hearts. And our job is to make sure that to inform our students that democracy stands, human rights stands, we fight for our values, and we are on the right side of history, and encourage our younger generation to keep our ways of living and continue to protect and defend our own freedom and our rights to survive.
So you see that the younger generation is not as confident in the face of China. Is that what you're saying?
The short answer is yes. I think now the younger generation is somewhat universal. They do not believe that they were born in the very fair period of time in history. This is a global issue, and they are not the benefactors of this so-called globalization, but their information flow were also pumped by internet. So there are struggle between two. One is the future possibility. The other is the current suffering reality. So our job is trying to encourage them to be more bright and fight for. Every generation has its problem, but we all survive.
So how do you think people's feelings towards China is going to affect the way they vote?
Of course, for elections, there are at least two benchmarks. You vote based on your feeling about national security related matters, like cross-strait relations, whether Taiwan is secure. You vote, your vote were determined by national security matters. Another benchmark is economy. Remember, many elections in different countries where actually people went to the voting booths and thought about whether we were better off economically than 4 years ago. So I think more mature people, more senior people, people in workforce would probably look into economic issues, the pocket issue, the paycheck issue. The younger generation instead are looking more at the identity issue, national pride, those kind of issue. So to me, the younger generation is more concerned about national security, self-identity. The senior people are more concerned about their bank account.
That makes sense because they have to deal with it, right?
Yes, of course.
I'm also curious about, we had a major spy case revealed in Australia, and that Taiwan is taking seriously. They're investigating into it, and they have this anti-infiltration bill. Tell me what you think of this case. How plausible is it? What is your take on it?
The case, as it had unfolded so far, has a lot of flaws from the angle of specialists. The story told by the defected young guy who claimed that he was the commander of the Hong Kong and Taiwan operations had blown itself, his own credibility. It is not the way how intel community work. And the name he mentioned, a couple investors in Hong Kong having a business related to the People's Liberation Army, happened to be in Taiwan when the case blew in Sydney. So it make people think that there must be a mastermind behind all these stories, and to match the time when it were, tipped off. So I would say that it will be a concern. China had tried to do espionage and intel operations against Taiwan since day one.
Right, sure.
Since 70 years ago. So it's so clear, it's so normal that China would do that to Taiwan. But this time, given the credibility of the story were in doubt, people may think that this is a kind of undisclosed campaign strategy to discredit one party or the other. So it is still developing. Some people are now protected or detained in a sense. And political figures can always take it out and make a case and bring it to news for one day and then keep it quiet. We have more than 30 days to go to the ballot. So I think the case will not be resolved until we pass the election.
But I think it does play on people's fears that China is manipulating, the media or Taiwan to its favor. And what do you think about that?
Yeah. Of course, China has the ability and probably has been doing that for a long time already. And whether Taiwan fears about it, yes and no, because no matter you feel uncomfortable or not, they will do it anyway. The key question is that how are we going to deal with China's influence campaign? They will do it now. If Han Kuo-yu get elected next year, I think they will continue to do that. So it's universal. It's not targeting one camp against the other. It might be that case in the campaign, but I think China has made it very clear that they want to take Taiwan back. They would not walk away from influence campaign. They will continue to try to intervene Taiwan's domestic affairs and the political process. So on the basic level, we need to have the understanding necessary that China will do it to Taiwan no matter who is in power. And then we put ourselves in another layer and see whether in this election has China done something to sabotage Taiwan's election, discredit the democratic process in general, or they are trying to help one camp against the other. That's the second layer. So if we have a basic understanding of the fundamentals, that China will do it anyway, then we should have our own, protective mechanism, psychological, and also political and legal. In every aspect, we need to protect our national security. This is a whole new ball game for everyone in this world when political processes are intervened by cyber channels and the internet.
So as a defense expert, what do you think is Taiwan's best defense against China?
I think our best defense is to make sure that we have a peaceful and calm political process, setting the example, showing Beijing that no matter what happens, we have a very successful, very peaceful political process. We elect our own president. Every time we peacefully, calmly elect our national leader is another proof that democracy can work in Taiwan and in the ethnic Chinese community.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor. I've been speaking with Professor Alexander Huang of Danjiang University. He's also the chairman of the Council on Strategic and Wargaming Studies. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Natalie So.